a co-director of Food Culture Collective, and my peoples come from Eastern Europe, Ukraine, Ashkenazi descent, and also Western Europe, Celtic, Anglo, and Germanic descent. I'm also based in Oakland. I'm really glad to be here with you all today. And let's see, will you share what we're about to do today?
Yeah. So Joe and I together are, this is really a working session. And so I hope you all are ready to be engaging with one another. We are working with our narratives and the ways that our narratives shape our culture. And so, and our narratives are embedded inside of us, as well as they hold us, right? And they carry us in how we move through the world. And so this is a working session that really engages each of us to be in dialogue with each other and our own selves about the stories and narratives that drive our work. And given that our history, which is present and alive with us, which is a history of colonization and colonialism and presently imperialism, that is also going to be shaping our culture and our cultural ways. And so we want to be aware of that, and we also want to be intentional about the kinds of stories and narratives that we do put forth that shine light on cooperation and our togetherness and our power. And so it's really being aware of, intentional, and in practice of the ways that we are living into our liberation.
Yeah. So I'll give you a little arc of what we're going to do. We'll start with connecting with vision. What do we mean by liberatory vision? And we'll do an exercise to warm up and start mapping some narratives that we notice in the world about food. And we'll play a game about power. And then we'll bring what we learned from the game to revisit the narratives that we notice in our food communities. And then we'll think about how we want to carry this into our work. Sound good? Find a seat where you feel truly supported. And start to tune into your sensations and what do your sensations guide you to do with your body. So feel free to squirm around or rock or shift your weight or stretch if that's what your body is asking for. And maybe tune into your breath, sensations of your breath, and just where the breath flows easy in particular. Maybe slowing the breath down and opening the doors of perception, as William Blake put it, just the whole range of sensation that our body has available to us. We want to tap into ways of knowing that are beyond the intellect. Like our mind likes to think it's in control, but it's just really one muscle in our body that is this complex organism. And connecting with your intuition, your ways of perceiving the world beyond analysis, start to tap into your imagination and imagine a world shaped by care for lands, waters, and people who nourish us. Imagine that the work that this community here today is doing has grown over time, maybe over our generations, into an inclusive, culturally rich, mutually nourishing, cooperative community food system in which all the beings who are part of feeding our human communities are cared for. And our human ways of living have been reshaped so that our infrastructure, our homes, and all of our community systems actually support this reciprocal loop. We've recognized that we all belong to the land, that together we have what we need to flourish if we share. And so let yourself take in the sensations of this world, the information available in this world. What does it look like? Sound like? Smell like? Taste like? What's happening in this flourishing, cooperative community food system? And allow yourself to immerse in that inner vision of a future world. Take that in. And with your next breath, starting to bring awareness back to this room that we are in, the light in the room, the people sitting near you. And take a moment just to reflect, is there anything in this vision of a flourishing community, cooperative community food system that really stands out to you? What arose? What insights arose? What observations or reflections arose for you? And we would love to hear from a couple folks. If there's something that felt particularly strong or clear for you, and maybe Pui-Ling can share the mic.
Hi, what really stood out to me was how my body felt with all of it. It was like if I'm in this, world that we're describing, I wasn't so much focused on what was happening in the world, it was that I just felt I was able to stay in my body and be fully there and not have to constantly be adjusting or pulling back to adapt to, whatever limitation or threat you see outside of you.
Yeah, thank you so much. How did you know? How did you know you were in your body and connected?
I guess I just wasn't managing anything. There was just this feeling of I was able to just sort of look and take in and that's the way I would say it. There was nothing to manage.
Yeah, so more ease?
Ease and sort of receptivity, and then just a feeling of, like alive, like the blood's flowing to all the parts of your body, and they're all kind of there, feeling just very whole.
Presence, yeah, whole, present. Thank you. Yeah, beautiful.
Yummy. Anyone else want to share their reflections?
I had a couple of things going on there. A couple were external, and it was the smell of the rain when it's raining, and you get that amazing smell of earth, and also the sound of birds, just that feeling of kind of nature. And then, kind of unexpectedly, as you were talking, Javita, I kind of felt emotional for a moment, and it was the idea of, was appreciating that everyone could be taken care of, from the very youngest to the very eldest. So that was beautiful.
Yeah, that really speaks to me, that everyone can be taken care of. Thank you.
So I came in just now towards the end of this practice, but the first thing that came into my mind as you were talking and what I started feeling was just a world where many worlds fit. So where we can be our true selves, but also connecting to our roots, to our culture, to our ancestors, and being able to co-live in a way that we can be who we are, but we are accepted by others and nurtured and loved, and be able to share those parts of us that are just deep, you know what I'm saying? Like, we all have a history, we all come from somewhere, and being able to revel in that and figure out how to be together in a space where we can share our foods, when we can share our traditions, our ceremonies, our rituals, our practices, but be respected and honored for who we are, you know, and all the things that y'all are saying, like just being safe, feeling good, you know, this heaven on earth that I think is always like the end goal, I think, you know, but that's kind of, and I'm sorry if I missed the whole meditation, but I think a lot about the Zapatistas and being in their communities and how they're very much who they are, you know, they're very much, you know, who they are, but then they're very welcome of people that come, and then they can be themselves. And I think that's one of the only places I really experienced that, you know, but it's so connected to the earth and so connected to the elements and so connected to our spiritual well-being. So I know we can do this here. I know it. It's just, we just got to break some shifts and paradigms and all these things and minds, but that's kind of what I thought.
Yeah, what really came through to me is like how live it is in you. And part of, I think, Joe inviting us to tune into our bodies too is that like that's a way for us to tap into that and bring it to life in the present. So you spoke so much to what we're missing and what's needed.
Yeah, and we wanted to start with this vision because we want, you know, in this community food work that we were doing, we want the stories that we tell about food to help us move towards this vision. And so connecting with this imagination and felt sense, right, of what's possible can then help us orient to this is what we want to create together.
So part of why what you had shared, what was your name? Irene, okay. Part of what I really loved about what Irene shared is that I felt there with you in that place. And that's the thing about stories, is that like we really get to connect with our relationships. It's personal, it's distinct, and it's relational, and it's like this lived expression of an experience. And sharing in story is our way of sharing that experience. And then narratives are when we start to layer these stories together, and through that we start to see some commonalities and some core beliefs that drive these stories. And then our culture is our ecosystem. It's all of that together across time, across people. It's connected to place, and it's really a driving force that shapes our lives. And so there's an interconnectedness and like a non-linearity to the ways that stories, narratives, and cultures are connected. And so part of why I'm speaking to this right now is that part of this working session will be about each of you connecting with stories here, and using our stories and narratives as a way to create cultural change. If white supremacy culture is alive, we too can make a liberatory culture alive as well. And that's what we're here to do.
Yeah, and one way of thinking about narratives in the way that we're using it today is that a narrative is like a deeper belief or a core belief about the world. And so narratives exist in the world. You know, we can definitely invent narratives, and mostly they're like in the ether, like in the dialogue around us. And so stories can tap into specific narratives to help activate those narratives. So that's what we're going to hone in on.
So something that I want to be nuanced about is the difference between narrative change and communications. So narratives are long-term, they are deep and systemic, they are primarily proactive, and they focus on our motivations and norms. And they may not lead to wins right now, but there's a persistence about these. So narrative change is really something like deeply embedded within, that we use as like orientation for our, both the stories we tell and the lives that we live. Versus communications, it's short-term, it's tactical, opportunistic, proactive, and reactive. It focuses on behavioral change or policy wins, and it's helpful for short-term wins, but can rely on harmful narratives to get those wins. And so the strategy here is to make sure that our communications align with the deep narratives that we are trying to grow and to bring to life. So this is so the work that we'll be doing together is to be engaging with harmful narratives and helpful narratives. So harmful narratives stand in the way of what we're trying to build and maintain existing supremacist power structures, and helpful narratives are in support of a future, of a dream, of a vision that we're trying to work towards and build trust and solidarity to grow our collective power. Is this where I get examples? Yeah, okay. So an example of a harmful narrative would be vote with your fork. I love going to the farmer's market, but there's a difference between going to the farmer's market and thinking that I am going to the farmer's market with a sense of individualism, that just merely by buying from the farmer's market, that is going to be the solution to really systemic, structural, larger forces at play in creating inequitable systems that actually make like shopping at a farmer's market inaffordable and inaccessible to some. And so vote with your fork is a harmful narrative in that it really pushes values of individualism and neoliberalism. Versus a helpful narrative would be, for example, like bringing forth our cultural and ancestral foods. That is going to be rooted in our relationships with our land, relationships with our peoples, yeah. So that's a little bit of that difference there, and so it's often about like the values that are driving an action that define whether or not it's helpful or harmful to the vision that we're working towards. Yeah, so John just asked a question about just giving more examples about harmful versus helpful narratives. Another harmful narrative would be like this example that communities can't take care of themselves. So mobile food trucks, for example, work to address places in which there is no food access or food deserts. And there's a difference between like the way that's typically not actually, yeah, I can think of many examples. The ways that if a food truck is in a project that is being put forth by like a white-led institution, all of that funding and resources is going to support a white-led institution that then goes to support BIPOC folks in these low access areas instead of just a direct way of sharing power and resources directly to these communities that then can govern themselves and how they choose to feed and nourish each other. So that's another difference there. And so the values embedded in that would be paternalism and yeah.
An example I can think of is that we need genetically modified food seeds to be drought resistant, and survive climate chaos, versus recognizing that humans have thousands of years of history with plants, and that's a reciprocal relationship. And so just that's one direct comparison. Yeah. Does that help? Also, that's what we're going to do here is next. We're going to see what examples we can come up with. And you can see in the circles on the screen, we recognize that some narratives can be helpful in some contexts and harmful in other contexts. And so it may depend on how it's used. So this is definitely, we don't have all the answers. And there's no right or wrong, we're not grading you on what you come up with. But this is just to see what do you notice about narratives that feel helpful, that help move towards that vision we touched in on, versus narratives that reinforce the harmful patterns that exist in globalized commodity food systems. Yeah.
I was also wondering if you could give an example of the difference between a narrative and a communication.
That's a really good question. I wish I had an example at the top of my mind. I think in the conversation about immigration, sometimes there's been communications messages that undocumented people are paying taxes and therefore deserve to be treated, with respect, versus a deeper, and that, is a communications message that tries to get to a helpful outcome, but relies on some potentially harmful bases for that message. And versus the cultural narrative strategy that I'm sure you all have heard of, migration is beautiful, and just recognizing that people have always migrated all over the world, and that's how humans came to occupy the whole world, and that's part of who we are as people. Yeah, did that help?
Okay. And so in small groups, there are pens and sticky notes on the ground in front of the pieces of paper. Draw 2 circles just like this. 1 circle for helpful, 1 circle for harmful. And then with the sticky notes, start to ideate on narratives. It could even be stories or actions too. That you feel are helpful or harmful, and stuck them up on the board, preferably just choosing one. There are 2 sticky note colors, and so 1 color for the helpful, 1 color for the harmful, so it's a little bit easier to distinguish visually. I really love seeing all of you talk. It really brings me so much joy, and we'd love, there'll be more talking later, so don't feel like this is the end of the conversation. It's just the beginning, actually.
We're going to come back to this.
And we have some play for you in coming up. So, yeah. So I'd love to hear some reflections. Just hearing a little bit about how that exercise was for you.
Hi, my name is Nancy Karina, and one of the harmful topics that came to my mind, I've worked at restaurants most of my life, and something that I deal with is there's people that come in and claim that rice tortillas and tofu are unhealthy. And it really makes me angry because I think about my ancestors who grew up in tortillas. I used to work at a Vietnamese restaurant. All of my coworkers were very healthy, and their foods were of rice and tofu. And so every single time I would argue with the person in the counter or who I was waiting on, I tell them, well, you know, like in Asia, like these foods, like they're very healthy. You know, so I think for me the helpful thing is the phrasing of that is ancestral foods are healing. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I think that goes to show how much of a binary our foods have become. Like, this is right food and this is wrong food. I love kale, but you know, there are other healthy foods too beyond what media might portray. And so love you bringing in this aspect of like culture, like in looking to our cultural ways, and asking ourselves what foods did they eat, and also meeting this moment, this time, place, what foods also are fitting of this moment of our current climate and of who's here at the table. Yeah.
I really liked what our group came up with, which is we touched on vegetarianism at the same time. There's like a big push to eat vegetarian and only vegan, but sometimes that's meat is very center and healing in some cultures. We also touched on GMO foods, which was initially designed to help with starvation and reach vitamins, but there's also an oncoming narrative about no GMO because it's against nature. But if you go back, it was intended to help. But so we put it in the middle because it can be harmful. Because I think someone brought up that's not sustainable in the long run to do GMO, something like that.
Thanks for that example. What's your name? T. Thank you, T. What I really loved about that is what I felt like in your group, you were really kind of digging in to like the history and like the people who were a part of shaping a certain narrative. And I feel like that there's a lot of information to be found when we dig into who is saying this, why are they saying it, where is it coming from? Yeah, thank you.
Hi, my name's Nabila. I was part of the group that we were speaking in Spanish. And I started off the conversation because we are on Kumeyaay land and all the indigenous land, and talked about, okay, there's food being provided to one of the indigenous communities. Well, oh yes, we're being helpful, but then again, are you being helpful? You just kicked them off of their land. Now you cultivated your own vegetables and now you're giving it to them, but it's not their traditional. So is it helpful, but is it harmful at the same time? It's almost like a slap in the face is what we were talking about. It's like, here we're feeding you, but you can't live on your land. And then that started our conversation into all these regulations and all these walls for small farmers and that to be able to sell even at what's called farmers markets. The vegetables have to be a certain size and this, and that's where we started talking about, well, then maybe we have to go back to farmers markets and move farmers markets onto sovereign land, where now the indigenous are the ones who oversee it and they can start pushing. And I think that was kind of where we were talking about, we just got stuck on government regulations, all these walls that get put up, especially in minority groups, on how you can succeed. We're helping you, but we're not helping. It's like the saying, teach a man to fish, right? I'm trying to translate it in English. Feed. Give a person a fish, feed him first. In Spanish it's different. Like, I know it's something in English.
Yeah, like give a person a fish, you feed them for a day, teach them how to fish, they're fed for a lifetime. Yeah.
And that is such a great bridge, thank you, because next we're going to layer in some awareness of power. And we're going to start with a little game. Maybe can you move to the next slide? So this comes from improv. You may be familiar with it. It's a little storytelling game. where we're going to do two versions. One where you'll go back and forth. We'll do pairs or trios, no more than 3 people.
Let's just do 2.
Yeah, two if there's even numbers. Find a buddy. And in the first round, it's a collaborative storytelling effort, but in the first round, your goal is to take control and redirect the story. And so each person will have one sentence to build the story, and then it passes to the second person, and they have a sentence to build the story. And in the first round, their framing is yes, but. Let's try that, and we'll come back.
We're gonna model. Joe and I are gonna model this. Okay, so the first round we're gonna play is the yes, but.
Okay. So my parents' generation got really excited about going back to the land. My parents bought a plot of land and moved our family there. That was 2 sentences, sorry.
Yes, but what about the family and all of what you were responsible for where they were living?
Yeah, but it was a really fun experience to grow up on a farm.
Yeah, but you also have to be thinking about like who was also living there too, and whether or not they wanted you there.
Yeah, but me and my brothers got to run around and play and kind of go wherever we wanted. You get the idea. I made it very personal with my family story, which maybe wasn't the best example, but it could be any story. It could be, a frog living in a pond. So it doesn't have to be your own personal story.
We'll do a yes and now.
So the first round is the yes but, where you're taking control. And then the second round is yes and, where you are building on what the other person offers. And you're trying to create a bigger story together. Do you want to start this one?
So I met someone here today who is doing a seed saving project in the Bay Area, and I'm really excited to work with them.
That's amazing. And I can imagine ways of connecting seed saving in the Bay Area to some of the storytelling work that's happening in the Bay.
I think it'd be really cool for us to do, but like maybe a collaboration where we have like a seed saving / storytelling party.
And can we make it a potluck?
Yeah, of course. So you get the idea. And at low stakes, we're playing. And also, I invite you to kind of notice what's happening in your body when you're going back and forth with yes and yes but. So buddy up, and this first round is just going to be a minute, and then we'll switch, and then it'll be another minute, and then we'll come back together. I'll give you about 20 seconds to find a buddy and introduce yourselves. Coming back together as a whole group. Wrapping up your last thoughts there. Taking a moment to notice how you are feeling in your body. And I'd love to hear a reflection from 1 or 2 people about how that game was. Maybe someone who I haven't heard the voice of yet.
So I like the difference between the approaches for each, because I think personally when I'm around someone that has a yes and kind of vibe to them, I'm more willing to discuss. But when I'm around people that have a yes but, I know that we are not collaborating on something, and I feel very like shut away and like I don't want to interact with that person.
Yes. Yes.
Could you say more about how you notice it in your body? Like, what are the different sensations?
I feel like I have to put up another barrier of like, no, I what I'm saying is important and what I'm saying matters. And I feel like I have to convince this person that my feelings are valid. And that's another like emotional toll that I have to take when I have that conversation. So I feel guarded and I feel like I have to express that I'm willing and valid in my expression.
And then the sensations for the yes and?
In the yes and, it was, I feel like you just get giddy and like, oh, that's so cool. And like, you know, you feel that community sense, which I really liked. I like when I'm like, oh, wow, that is so cool. That's my favorite feeling.
Yeah. This is a game to really play with power and to feel actually how subtle our expressions of power can be. Maybe subtle isn't the right word, but nuanced, and that they are everywhere. It's how we show up in our conversation, and that they make a big difference for whether or not something feels collaborative or something feels like we need to defend ourselves.
I think it's pretty clear that the sentence structures of yes, but creates this wall where like there can only be one truth. So when you are in a moment of conflict and you have opposing views and it's like very charged and the topic is very serious, is the encouragement to just force the and thing?
Yeah, that is a great question. And it's would take us in a slightly different direction than we're going, but there is a session on conflict in next. Oh, it's right now? It was earlier. Oh, it's this morning. Sorry. but just high level, I would say you're not ever trying to force an and, but rather trying to create space for multiple experiences to be true and acknowledging that there can be multiple truths at the same time.
Yeah, would love to touch base on anyone who's also interested in other conflict stuff. We have resources for that, but that's in a different direction. But that's a great question.
So the reason we play this game, we draw on this framing of power from the author's name is Cindy Suarez. The name is at the bottom of the slide. And she names that power can be used in supremacist ways that reinforce domination and control, and resource consolidation that benefits a few and at the expense of many. And power could also be used in a liberatory way that increases agency and creativity, supports the flow of reciprocity in relationships, and holds complexity, serving the integrity of the whole. And so, it gets to what you described as your experience of the yes and is like it gets us into flow and where it like sparks new ideas. And of course, that's a game, so it's like a simplified version. But I think we've all had experiences, in life that we can recognize these distinctions. Our globalized commodity food systems have been shaped by supremacist power. Really it originated through colonialism, the land grabs and asserting control of whole territories and peoples, as well as plantations and forcing people to labor for the benefit of others. Those models are what created the dominant food systems we have today. And we know that there are community level food efforts, like that you all are a part of, we all are a part of, that are growing a different way of relating through food. And so we want our narratives and the stories that we tell about food to move us in that liberatory direction.
So we're going to return back to our groups, and we're going to spend some time reflecting on liberatory narratives
so just adding on this power awareness to the work you are already doing, and starting to think about the messaging or the deeper narratives that connect with liberatory values. And so this one on the screen right now is the supremacist values, and Puiling described this one earlier, connecting with individualism and competition, and a logic of consumerism, of consumption. And then the liberatory example we're going to share is food is relational. And the deeper values in this narrative are mutualism and reciprocity, recognizing that life is interdependent and that it's our healthy relationships that support the whole to thrive. And so that solution implied in this narrative is to connect with and support the web of relationships that nourish us. So you can work with the ideas you already generated, see if the power awareness gives you a new lens, and you can also add on. But the question is, what narratives do you notice alive in your food ecosystem that feel liberatory to you? And they might be examples you already have up, and you might have new ones.
Neville, part of our group, suggested we look at where we had an harmful and then bring the yes and exercise to that. And I think what I noticed is there was almost nothing up there that you couldn't find some opportunity and some, excitement about it. They were all a starting point then, rather than just bad news.
I love that. You found a way to make them all liberatory.
Earlier we were talking about, you can feed a person a fish or teach them to fish, or you could create a whole new fishery, actually, was the third part we didn't get to. So, and I think that's what San Diego Food System Alliance is really trying to do, is create a whole new ecosystem model around it. So in the context of this exercise, when you added the additive of the power dynamic, by taking what purportedly was a harmful condition or narrative and reframing it as a positive, you're meeting people where they're at, and you can move the whole system forward rather than being binary and saying us and them and you don't get it, and put more polarization, more division, more individuation, more zero-sum game thinking. So I think that was the sentiment that informed what we did.
Yeah, thank you. I love, meeting people, the system where we're at, and moving in the direction we want to go together. Yeah, thank you. How about someone from the Spanish-speaking group? Any reflections? Of course, you could share in Spanish and maybe
something that we discussed in our group was talking about kind of like the narrative of like things have to be perfect in order to move forward with them, and like recognizing like, specifically with food, it's like most of the time, like if we're growing food on our own, it's gonna look imperfect, but we've been like trained with that narrative of like when we go in grocery stores that we have to buy like perfect looking produce and things like that. And then I think we also just discussed like the power of like autonomy and advocacy, and how like a lot of times like communities who have been historically marginalized like do take up those roles to have to move towards like advocating for ourselves and being able to transform institutions or like power relations in that way.
Yeah. What I really love about both just the share so far. What was your name? Floor. What was your name? Neville. Floor and Neville. Just the sense of like actually just digging deeper into something and having like both an awareness and intentionality, and then activating where we're coming from, like what value we actually want to be moving from. And I feel like that's really the power of our stories and narratives, and what we're really trying to do is dissect what our world looks like and be engaging in the kinds of stories and narratives that we're putting forth in that.
Yeah, something to add on that. I came in a little late, so kind of missed some things, but they caught me up, and I will say that just the brief time I've been here, it's got me thinking more and more about how when people respect more of like the spectrum, I think it's always like right and wrong, but I think when people respect like the spectrum of choices more, you can bring more people along with you rather than just saying the spectrum up to here. Because we were talking about like veganism and like consuming meat in the context of like the climate effects. And so if you say, hey, only those that are not eating meat are helping the environment, but we also put in like, we talked about a couple of different things, but we also, we talked about the regenerative ways to raise animals, and it's not just one way to do it. So there are ways to raise and commune with animals that are actually beneficial for the environment and the climate. So if you take that whole spectrum, you can bring a lot more people with you than just saying veganism. And then if you want to eat meat, then the only way to there's only one way to do it, and that's bad. But it's not true. So.
Yeah, thank you. And so that working group in the middle there is kind of helping us all notice the intention here is not to create a right and wrong rubric, right? This is not like a thing to go out and judge people for using the wrong messaging. The point is rather to connect with the deeper values, and I think especially those narratives that are kind of at the overlap of the Venn diagram that can be helpful sometimes and harmful other times, to that awareness of like how is it being used and what effect does it have? Is it supporting agency and creativity? Is it supporting flow in relationship? Is it supporting an integrity of a larger whole? That those can be kind of helpful ways to check in about like how we're receiving narratives. Yeah, I see a question or a reflection in the back.
Hi, also part of the Spanish-speaking group. One of the things that I learned from the compas here from Poder Popular, they shared sort of what popular power means to them, and they shared sort of their experience going basically door to door and engaging with community. And they brought up the example of sort of public health and during COVID, making sure that people had reliable information. And the sort of problem that arose with all these strands of misinformation, which are, and this is sort of like a conflict that I see. It's sort of a circuit of yes and, it's sort of like an escalating, and therefore the sort of door-to-door work of creating reliable information is, in our opinion, sort of like a way of building this liberatory power, creating these conversations that are face-to-face, and doing sort of the militant work of sort of engaging with the community face-to-face and building that kind of reliability and assurance that, you know, you're being taken care of by sort of a larger community and not sort of stranded at sea with a sea of like spiraling information, misinformation.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that example of like the direct relationship and connection and communication is also narrative change. And a lot of times when people talk about narrative change, they focus on like pop culture or news, media, and your example really highlights that we all can participate in changing the story just in our direct relationships and in the ways that we talk to our family and our neighbors, and those day-to-day conversations too can make a big impact. And that's a great bridge for where we're going next.
Yeah. So I'd love to bring it back to here, to ourselves and how we are moving in community together. And so what we're going to do is we're going to we're going to meditate a little bit with a spiral. And so there are Post-its on the ground. I invite each of you right now to grab a Post-it and a pen, and we are together going to draw a spiral as a meditative activity.
Oh, also on the chair by the exit, we've put some cards about Food Culture Collective. You're welcome to take one of those. There's also some cards that ask for your name and contact information if you would like to share that with us so that we could add you to our email list. Feel free to fill that out, and you can either leave it on the chair or come and hand it to one of us.
The last thing I'll just say is a lot of gratitude and potential. I feel like the way that I see what you're writing is a commitment to ourselves and our community. And so I'm really grateful for what each of you are committing to. Yeah. And may the stories that each of you hold be continued to be shared. May these stories be speaking to our liberation, to our life. And yeah, thank you so much.